We have 4 more panels to go. And believe me, it's going to be as amazing as this morning to inform you about the European Accessibility Act, a very important act. Okay, did you all have a good lunch, and did you try the cookie already, the AccessibilEU cookie? No? You didn't? You try? It was good. Don't you think so? Okay. Okay. We need to remember the important message of what people are telling us today. Let me make it visible for you one more time.
On a purple background, a yellow line moves, forming a tangle, then rectangles, sawtooth shapes and waves until it becomes a straight horizontal line. Voiceover on top of text appearing on screen.
Working together to build a more accessible European Union requires communication that is equally accessible. Let's get started. What defines AccessibleEU? We are the facilitators, the ones who promote it, the ones who help make it possible. And there is a word that facilitates action, that allows you to do something. A word that, interestingly, is found in our very own brand, the suffix able or ible. It indicates the capacity to receive the action of the verb. BLE, bull.
The line creates illustrations.
Bull means tendency, aptitude, skill, or ability to do or be something. And this is our idea, BLE, bull. It defines the capacity we want to build to make things practicable, livable, suitable, workable, etc. Bull. It is the engine to ensure that people enjoy and participate in society with full rights and opportunities. Our call to action. Bull. And all communicated in a way that is relatable, understandable, approachable, reliable, agreeable, sensible. AccessibleEU. Let's make it accessible. More bull and less blah blah.
AccessibleEU image posters and their placement in urban settings are shown. Their design is clean and clear. Each is split in 2, contrasting inaccessible elements with their accessible versions. One shows stairs with the word unlivable, contrasted with a lift labelled livable. Another shows a toilet under unsuitable, next to an adapted toilet labelled suitable. The third shows a door with a Greek sign above it, incomprehensible. Next to it, a door with pictograms for a mixed accessible toilet labelled comprehensible. The last poster features a jagged line under impossible. Beside it, the line is straight and horizontal, possible. The posters are displayed on building facades and in public transport stations. Voiceover on the text appearing on screen.
AccessibleEU. Let's make it accessible.
The AccessibleEU Centre logo is displayed.
I really think it's a very good one. Yeah, more blah and less blah blah. We have to remember this one. I think it's, yeah, it's going to make a lot of impact if we move it on. Well, the next panel after lunch. What are we talking about when we are designing mobility for all across Europe? She is an international specialist in mobility and inclusion, focusing on all modes of transport. Give her a very warm welcome. Hear it from senior expert of AccessibilEU, Anne Fry, and of course, her panel.
Thank you all very much. This is the worst possible slot just after lunch. I will be keeping a very firm eye in case anybody nods off, and I will then ask you a question, so be very afraid. I've been worrying since this morning when Alejandro challenged us to songs. Lots of transport songs, of course, quite dull ones like trains and boats and planes. But then I thought about maybe rewriting some in a transport context, and I was struck by Fly Me to the Moon, which really needs to be Fly Me across Europe without breaking my wheelchair. So there is scope there that we can work on. So I have a great panel, 2 people who are from the transport industries and working hard in rail and other modes to make journeys more accessible, and 2 people representing consumers with disabilities. So we should have an interesting dialogue. I will introduce them, ask them just briefly to tell us about themselves, and then I have a series of questions and challenges for them. So they are Bertrand Minary from the UIC. Online joining us is Anne-Laure Lemaire from the UITP. We have Soufiane El Amrani from Inclusion Europe with his colleague Freddie, and Marie Danninghaus from the European Disability Forum. So a great panel of experts. So just a brief introduction from each of you, because I very much want to hear from all of you, just to check you're awake, of course, before we're finished. So Bertrand, do you want to give me just a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, who I am. Hello to all of you. Bertrand Minary, I am the passenger director at UIC. UIC is the International Union for Railways. It's 100 years of experience in standardization, technical stuff mainly. And we have a special group dedicated to accessibility, mainly a group called Passage, gathering more than 30 operators in 25 countries. And it's composed of train operators and infrastructure managers. So my job is to coordinate all the work in general in passenger, but especially with accessibility.
Absolutely, we've got the right man here today. Anne-Laure, if you're able to join us online, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, do you hear me well?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, apologies for not being with you today in the Brussels ball. I understand I missed good cookies, so maybe I'll try to be with you next time. But fortunately, technology allows me to have this exchange even remotely. So I'm the passenger and railway expert in UITP Europe, so the EU Affairs Department of UITP. UITP is the International Association of Public Transports. It has, at European level, more than 450 members, both public transport operators and authorities, and worldwide more than 2,000 members. We have also a dedicated working group in UITP Europe dealing with accessibility and EU affairs related to accessibility issues. But we are setting also globally now a working group on accessibility, which will have the objective to understand gaps and needs, promote accessibility, so basically set up a forum to exchange about best practices and how accessibility is organized at a strategic level in the different organizations, members of UITP. The working group is open to all UITP members, but there will be also space for passengers associations. So it's not only for operators or authorities, members of UITP, but also encouraging this dialogue with PRM representatives. And within the potential topics that will be identified by the group, we can already maybe imagine something like passenger information, AI, code design and planning and governance, and the kickoff meeting is planned for the autumn 2025.
Thank you very much. Clearly there is a lot of good work going on there, so let's see what we can do to build on that. Let me next very briefly, Soufiane, can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Soufiane El Amrani. I'm the accessibility expert and self-advocate at Inclusion Europe.
Lovely. And Marie Danninghaus at the end there. Marie?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Marie. I work for the European Disability Forum, and we represent with an umbrella organization of disabled persons organizations in Europe. And I actually have been working on the Accessibility Act from the very beginning, so for 12 years ago. And I'm very happy today to see, let's say, the fruits of our work and to see how we can go even further.
Thank you so much. I think this focus on mobility and transport is absolutely fundamental to everything we're discussing. If you can't travel independently, you can't get to work, you can't have a social life, you can't get to healthcare or education. So all of us are totally dependent on the ability to move. And yet we know that in spite of years of legislation, both technical legislation and passenger rights legislation in Europe, people with disabilities have problems every day still to travel. So what I want to do this afternoon in the brief time we have is look at the European Accessibility Act, of course, and what difference that will make, but also to look more broadly at accessibility issues and where we see the main challenges and gaps that need to be addressed. So my first question to my panel really is, what do you see as the main challenges to better accessibility of public transport across Europe? Bertrand, can you take that one first?
Thank you, Anne. From our side, I mean, if we look at what is the future, transport, of course, must be more than ever decarbonized, because, you know, it's one of the main source of greenhouse gases. So we act for more public transport, of course, rail-based. So if we consider rail as the backbone of mobility in Europe, of course, we need to be inclusive to all the people, everybody. So there is a question of right and regulation, and you're right, from one side, but the other is more the technical work that was already achieved for a lot, but it's not finished. For example, at the time being, we know that 71% of the station are fully accessible, so that means there is a gap yet, for example. We have also the harmonization of rules and the train and the train operations, the skills we need. Of course, we will talk about trainings. So it's more internal stuff, but we have also a lot to do with international association. And I could say that we need to learn also from the customer. Everybody takes the train. Just to give you an idea, we have 8 billion of travelers each year in the train. And that means, if we consider the percentage of people, that means we have 100 million of people with PRMs that could jump in the train. And we know that some of them, a lot of them, finally cancel their travel due to the different obstacles they are achieving in their door-to-door venue. So this is real the goal: the customer experience, the technical staff, the training, and also listening better our customers and organization.
Thank you. I think it's so important that there is continuity between different rail companies, and it's possible to make a journey across Europe without having to worry about different access standards, different conditions, and so on. So that's very good to hear. Anne-Laure, what do you see as the biggest challenges from the UITP's perspective?
Maybe just before talking about the challenges, just a quick reminder of how the public transport is organized, because it has an impact on the accessibility strategy. So, you know, operations in public transport are run under a public service contract. So there's a contract between the authority organizing the service and the operator running the service. And decisions on accessibility may be based either on a decision by the operator to do something on a voluntary basis, or on a decision by the authority, which then drafts accessibility requirements in the contract, which the operator will have to follow, or coming from local, national, or European regulations. And this being said, the public transport sector takes accessibility as a challenge and is working on it for decades. I know some of you will think that accessibility in public transport is not 100% achieved, and I would respond to that this is work in progress. As I always say, Rome wasn't built in a day. We have sometimes more than a century old infrastructure, like metro networks in Paris or in London, where infrastructure cannot be so much adapted to be accessible to everyone. But in these cases, the operators and the authorities offer alternative routes, like surface routes with buses or trams serving the same origin and destinations. And you also need to think that public transport is basically made to offer mass transit and move thousands and billions of people every day. So whenever works are made on infrastructure and rolling stock, it has consequences on the overall flow of the services, and it has costs as well. So every accessibility strategy and decision is very much made depending on the local conditions, and our our members very often have continuous dialogue in place with members of associations representing passengers, including passengers with specific needs. So then the best or the most suitable solution can be implemented on a specific local case.
Thank you. I think you've made a very good point there that transport is, for obvious reasons, constantly moving, so you can never be sure that what worked yesterday will work today. And I guess that's one of the big challenges. Soufiane, let me turn to you. What do you see from your point of view as the biggest challenges?
So how many times have you gone somewhere new using public transport and just quickly looked up to go where and at what time? Taking public transport is not as easy for everyone. People with intellectual disabilities face challenges when taking public transport every day. Hi, I'm Soufiane El-Amrani, accessibility expert at Inclusion Europe and a self-advocate. At Inclusion Europe, we listen to 20 million people with intellectual disability and their families living in Europe. It is important to know how to move around to be able to go to work, to the cinema, and other places. Mobility is about being independent and connecting people. But sometimes people need a bit of help to know where to go. This help can be information at the station, somebody to ask questions to, or knowing how to use the transport app on your phone. And all these things have to be accessible. People with intellectual disabilities might find it hard to use the ticket machine or to ask how or know how to ask for assistance. And when things go wrong, it can be difficult to find information about what to do next. It's even more difficult when they don't speak the language and when information is not easy to understand. To solve these problems, public transport must be accessible also for people with intellectual disabilities. Accessible transport empowers people to go to work, to go to the hospital, to see friends like everyone else. So any good work that makes public transport more accessible is welcomed.
Thank you so much. I think one of the key points you've made there is that the transport environment is actually challenging for everybody. I don't know about you, but even as a frequent traveller, I'm intimidated and anxious going through a big station or a big airport. How do I find the right platform? Where do I find the toilets? Whatever your need might be, it's difficult to create the calm around yourself to enable you to make that challenge. I always say that people who work in the transport industry should be absolutely banned from wayfinding within their own airports and stations, because they know where things are. You need to bring in a complete stranger at the door of the airport and say, okay, what's your priority? What do you need to find first? How do you make yourself comfortable within that environment? And I think, as Soufiane has indicated, that's an area where we still have a lot to do. Marie, can I turn to you for your perception on the biggest challenges still? Thank you.
Yeah, I think challenges is the good keyword here, and maybe to take a step back, because when we were thinking about the European Accessibility Act, that was of course also something on our mind, because the challenges were there even then, and even bigger ones. So I personally was actually very disappointed that we did not manage to include more in the Accessibility Act. So I think that because mobility and transport, I mean, we have some parts covered, but that is mainly the online environment, ticketing machines, etc. But to me, so the biggest challenge and are still the actual obstacles. So I'm really talking about inaccessible vehicles, infrastructure, even the online environment. So I think this really just having a bus that you can just get on that has information screens and information like loudspeaker information is still not taken for granted. So I liked Anne-Laure's formulation of a work in progress, and I think this is very much the truth. It's still a work in progress. And I think if you'd ask me to rank the challenges, what is the biggest one? There's so many, I could talk the whole day. I would say if I look from a European legislative perspective, we have obviously some things covered more than others. We have passengers' rights in the different transport modes. We have already accessibility requirements for trains. We have accessibility requirements for certain types of buses. But obviously there are huge gaps. And to me, I would like to maybe point out the two, and that is the accessibility of aircraft or air travel. Just the physical accessibility of the plane, for example, is not covered anywhere, and we will have a report, a human rights report on that, on air travel coming out later this year, so stay tuned for that. And the other big point, and there I think I have to disagree with Anne-Laure, I think we're very far away from the 100%. Urban public transport to me is another big challenge, because there is no rules and legislation, where we see like an approach that every municipality, every city has to reinvent the wheel when they're procuring, for example, new trams or new metros. And it would be so much easier if there were rules that the cities knew how to do this properly. And of course, we have procurement rules and we have the public service obligations, but I think that to apply that more consistently, I think that would be really, really helpful. And then the part which I'm not going to talk about, just mentioning, is of course the enforcement of the rules, where we are also lagging behind in many ways.
Thank you. It's a lot of challenges there, but goodness, we need to get those on the table, because...
You asked, Anne.
I did, no, absolutely. And we talked this morning about the gap that exists between what the law says and what happens in practice. And I think it's really important that we focus on that, so we understand what still needs to be done. It's too easy to say we've passed the law, the job is done. We know that isn't the case. We've heard about some excellent work from UIC, from UITP, but we're also hearing about the day-to-day issues that people still face. My next question was really about how better to include people with disabilities, not just in a nice little panel that says, yes, we think this is lovely, but right from the starting point of design, and not on a voluntary basis. One of my pet hates is expecting people with disabilities to work for free. You have expertise. Your expertise is your own experience. You do need to be paid and valued for that work. And I think that's hugely important. So let me particularly go, Soufiane, to you and then to Marie. What would you like to see that would involve people with disabilities more effectively?
So transport companies and governments should ask people with intellectual disability for their input from the start, because it will be them who are using public transport in their everyday lives. If people with intellectual disabilities are not included from the beginning, the service will not be accessible to use at all. Transport organizations should have meetings with people with intellectual disabilities to hear their views on public transport. They need to make sure the meeting is easy to read and understand, that the speakers speak slowly and in plain language, and that there are enough breaks.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Marie, what would you like to add in terms of really effective engagement with people with disabilities from the outset?
Well, I'm talking here from the perspective, of course, of an organization representing persons with disabilities. I think what's also important, besides this really the direct consultation that Soufiane mentions, is a really structured approach to this. So it should really start already with the legislation to make sure that persons with disabilities are involved in designing and in the decision-making procedures to make sure the rules are good. But then, of course, also in the implementation on national level, when you have an EU directive that is transposed, again, organizations of persons with disabilities should be involved on national level. And then we talk about, of course, that there are more practical things like when a city is procuring new buses, for example, this should be done with the local organizations representing persons with disabilities. And as you said, Anne, a really important point here is not to assume that this is done as like a voluntary kind of engagement, but it should be paid accordingly, remunerated. It's for the expert to travel there, but also for the time that you spend doing it. And what we see, for example, is that it's really hard to find good experts because persons with disabilities often are already excluded from the education. So having someone who has all the training, and then of course the topics are very complex. So you have to be really spend a long time to get familiar. And I'm just mentioning the word standardization, and you all know how difficult it is to find good experts who have the time, the expertise, and the possibility to do it. So I think to have the proper involvement, it needs to be done in an organized way, it needs to be funded, and I think that to be on an equal basis with others, and amongst others industry, for example, this is super important.
Thank you. I wanted to move on to the third issue that I've identified, which is how better to ensure that everybody working in the transport industries is properly trained in disability issues, that they're aware of and understanding. I don't just mean the frontline staff, the bus driver, the guy in the ticket office, but the engineers, the planners, the architects. All of them need to know about disability if they're going to deliver a good quality service. So Bertrand, let me turn to you. What is UIC doing to ensure that the rail companies are delivering good quality training across the board?
Yeah, you are right. If we start from the beginning, there is a front line. You were talking about operations and staff on boards and in stations. So of course they are trained for this. You were, Mary, talking about standardization, which is more my purpose for the time being, because what we can observe is that every country is managing differently by design, because it's a product of the history. At UIC, 15 years ago, we created a group called Passage, I was talking about a little bit. So it's 3 meetings a year with technical visits, current and permanent exchanges between more than 30 operators. These 30 operators are represented each time by an expert dedicated to passengers with reduced mobility in each company. That means for SNCF, Eurostar, SNCB, SYOT, and whatever. So the question is, after, how do we decline this inside our process first, and then how do we decline this into the management? Because you're right, Anne, it's also a question of mindset for a lot. Personally, I passed 20 years at SNCF, believe me or not, but 20 years ago, I was trained about this, just to have the mindset of inclusivity. I don't feel like an expert on these aspects more, of course I could not, but just to show that things move a long time ago in that way, and the question is more the rhythm we put into to make compliance. So what we do at UIC now is gathering now all this good initiative, standardize a lot, and then show that and find common ways to go. I will just brief you an example. I have one here so about standardization. You know, I have 3 sheets here. So, of course, this is not this is back office. This is not front office. I will show you. But this database contains. Yeah. It's about general information for passengers with reduced mobilities. That means what are the assistants, what are the numbers, what are the contacts, how do we take in charge, what are the special tools, luggage, assistant dots, whatever. We have now this database. It's a long job to obtain this and to capture this for all the countries. And now we have. But what we will do is provide this online. We have, for example, a tool called PRM ABT, that advanced booking tool. It's used for internal purpose, but also for external aspects. And now we are going to develop an app that will be open in order to do this sharing. So that's the way I want to illustrate the job we are doing. So it's back office, it's front office, it's training. And about training, what we are doing also is to concentrate our force in one single platform now, and we work with ONCE. So, and we have no prototype of accessibility course on accessibility on rail. This is very, okay, this is with pictures, you see people wheelchair. And we begin the story by a traveler in wheelchair that wants to take the train, but he is stopped by the elevator that's not working. That's simply. So that's the way to change. So, of course, now we are trying to decline it into the companies, and it will be, of course, with the company to take this in charge. But so to sum up, management, operational, and standardization at the same time. And of course, we work in cooperation. I would like to say that we are working with organization, supports, and also UITP, of course, because it's end-to-end journey and not only trained by itself, because it's not valid. The journey starts at the door of your flat, of your house, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And a very strong point that every journey starts with the planning before you leave your front door, and it takes you right the way through. So what happens at the station, on the train, on the bus, is only part of the picture. Anne-Laure, can I turn to you with the same question? How do you make sure that everybody throughout the entire management structure, from front line to back office, has the right understanding and awareness?
Well, first of all, at UITP, we cannot really make sure that, our member companies, of what internally within our member companies, what happens exactly, but we try to encourage this communication and these awareness raising exercises. But just let me first come back to a point two points mentioned earlier regarding, for instance, what Soufiane said about human assistance and the need to have someone being able to help in a station, for instance. This is something that we very much underline also in UITP. Whatever work we do to infrastructure our rolling stock to make network accessible to all passengers, we also need somehow human assistance, human help, just someone that can help, or phone number in case something goes wrong or someone needs a help. So how the infrastructure work is not enough. We also need somehow some human touch, human feeling. And coming back to your point and on the need to have strangers testing basically the signs in a station to make sure that they are understandable to everyone. Just an example in Châtelet station, so the area metro station in Paris, which is one of the biggest, I think, station of interchange and connection in Paris. I remember when it underwent very big works, refurbishments, a few of them, a decade ago, more or less, some 10 years ago. They had trials in the stations with non-users of the station, just to make sure they were able to find their way using the new signs postage that had been done. So that's a case that could be implemented elsewhere, and I'm sure it's the case. Also, another example is the Schumann station in Brussels, which I think more or less everybody in this room knows. Just to, when they had these big works recently, and just to make sure that the new station was more accessible than the previous one and at least understandable for all passengers. They had some non-residents, non-users of the station in a wheelchair, blind people using the station just as a test, and then got their feedback and made some adaptations when something was not the most suitable for passengers with special needs. So these kind of good practices will be again shared in the upcoming UITP working group dedicated on accessibility. Again, this is a global working group, so with best practices from all over the world. So that also opens other possibilities, other opportunities, because we often here in AccessibleEU and within UITP Europe talk about accessibility seen from within the European Union, but there are also things happening elsewhere which could be taken as good examples. And yes, we also work with other organizations like like UIC. So we exchange also what our respective members do in accessibility to further develop these best practices exchanges at associations level.
Thank you so much.
And maybe one last thing, I wanted to maybe launch a call to EDF and other associations today. We had in 2016 the publication of a guide on accessibility that was in the context of the bus and coach passenger rights regulation, and I'm sure Mary will remember that. So this guide had the objective to raise awareness on the needs of passengers with reduced mobility in the context of public transport. And now we have other passenger rights regulation ongoing. We have a multimodal passenger rights regulation also upcoming. So UITP would be happy to update this guide or draft a new accessibility guides meant for our members, operators, members, staff. So to raise their awareness on the specific needs of passengers with reduced mobility. So this is a call, EDF or other associations, if you would like, we can, to discuss this further. Happy to discuss this further with you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very useful call, and I'm sure that EDF and Inclusion Europe will take you up on that, and maybe others too. Just a couple of really interesting points to pick up from that. The first was Anne-Laure mentioning that people who are not users were brought in to look at the accessibility of Schumann Station. I think that's really important to not just talk to the people who are travelling, because in a way they've overcome their fears and anxieties, but talk to the people who are still too frightened to travel. Find out what it is that's stopping people from travelling. I think that's the fundamental way to break down some of the barriers. And I also wanted to touch on something Sufyan said about apps. We've heard a lot about wayfinding apps, information apps, all great stuff, but we do know, and Anne-Laure said the same thing, that particularly older people want the presence of uniformed staff. You can have the biggest destination board in the world telling you that the next train to your station is in 10 minutes, and people still would like to turn to somebody in uniform and say, is this the train I need? So there's an inbuilt reluctance still, not just among older people, but in many cases that is the case, to rely on technology. And I think it's a mistake for us to think that the present generation of older people, well, you know, when they're gone, we'll all be really tech savvy and we won't need any of this. That won't happen, because I think each of us, as we reach a certain age, and I think I'm there, find we can't keep up with technology anymore. So technology will always move faster than we are capable of absorbing as we age, or if we have particular needs. So I think it's hugely important in the transport world generally that people with uniforms, people with information, people who are trained are fundamental to that situation. I wonder now, are there questions from the floor that people would like to put to our panel? Hands shooting up already, that's great. I can see, let's start with the gentleman there with a white beard and a white shirt and a black jacket, if you can find him. Okay, microphone is coming, I hope.
One, two. En audio. Okay. I have two remarks. One of them is that this European Disability Act is too restricted to digital services and less to physical accessibility. And here, speaking about transport, we have to mention, of course, also the case of physical accessibility for pedestrians, sidewalks, for infrastructure of stops and stations and so on. So the present version of the EAA Act should be extended in the future. So this is one point. And we have to consider also stakeholders like municipalities for issues of pedestrian accessibility, wheelchair accessibility, and so on. Municipalities are very important. The second thing is a political one. If you notice in Europe, there is a division between countries, like the German-speaking countries, where there is a vertical integration of the rail infrastructure or the bus stop infrastructure and the operations. In other countries, like the Anglo-Saxon ones, there is a disintegration. So the operators are private ones. For the infrastructure are responsible public authorities and public infrastructure providers. And this disintegration brings a lot of problems because in matters of accessibility. So I have noticed that in the German-speaking countries, really, issues of accessibility are taken more seriously, and this is a political note. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gosh, we could discuss that all afternoon. Let me see, Anne-Laure, do you have a view? I mean, there's a very important point there that accessibility of the pedestrian environment, the bus stop, the tram stop, is all part of delivering accessibility. Do you have any comments on the need to integrate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to. I mean, you know all that accessibility has to be taken from a global point of view. So it's not only, as the gentleman said, it's not only about making a bus accessible or a stop accessible, but it's also, and Bertrand said it also, to have the whole way to reach the station and then entering the station, getting on your bus and then back home or whatever, accessible. And on this, in UITP, we, as you know, we have this mix of operators, authorities, industry as well. So we hope that within this working group, which is open to all UITP's members, we will also discuss and identify gaps in the sense that having only one stop accessible, but not the way to achieve, to reach the stop doesn't help. So these kind of issues will be hopefully discussed also in UITP working group on accessibility.
Thank you so much. We have only a few minutes left, but let me see if there are other... Oh, Bertrand, please, come in.
Very quickly about your point about the regulation, just to illustrate. You're right that the European Accessibility Act is mainly, I would say, software to play slow, but it's not the only regulation. Especially in railway, we have a rule called TSI, Specification Technique d'Interopérabilité, that means technical specification for interoperability, that was issued a long time ago, and is regularly updated by European Railway Agency. So this simply goes with specification on how the hardware works in station and in trains. But as Anne said, the question is to make this possible with the heritage of more than 150 years of railways and stations especially. So this is a way, but we have directive for very practical aspects.
Thank you. One very brief question. Yes, Jack. Wait for a microphone, if you could. Keep it brief if you wouldn't mind, otherwise we'll be out of time. Thank you.
I just wanted to point to another gap, and this is that 80% of trips that people make are made by car. And disabled people would want to travel in the same way as everybody else. So we shouldn't forget cars from this. And I don't suppose there's anybody here from the car industry. I'm sure there aren't. And so somebody this morning said, don't use the Accessibility Act as a threat. Actually, I think you probably do need to use it as a bit of a threat, because I think the car industry probably won't do anything unless there's some kind of legislation or the threat of legislation. So I think as this work goes forward, I think it'll be very important to look at cars. And at the present, they have to be adapted, and it's costly and it's complicated. And I think that's a very important area that we can improve access, I think, if we get the car industry to work with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Again, that's another whole day's worth of debate. Lady behind you, but very, very brief, if you would. Just right here. Lady in the white top. Another one over there as well. Okay, but very quick. We've got 1 minute left, so.
Thank you. Hello, I'm originally from Costa Rica. However, I live here in Belgium now for the last 3 years. I just have a comment in regards to the train stations and information that is accessible or not accessible. Specifically, in situations of disruption, most of the times the information to tell us that something is broken down or that we need to switch platforms is all in spoken language or on speaker, and we don't get this information visually. So this happens to the deaf community many times. People are running out of the train, or the train is moving somewhere else and we don't know what's happening. So I just want to know if there's any awareness of the situation involving the deaf community and finding out how you can create more information visually for the deaf community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I wish we had more time to deal with that. I do know, certainly in the UK, where I'm from, we have real-time sign language information boards at stations, and indeed coming on trains. But I don't know, Bertrand, do you have a very brief comment?
Yeah, very brief comment, you're right. There is an obligation with passenger rights regulation now to take in charge any disruption during the journey. So it's mandatory. So it's for everybody. And we need also to inform and to take in charge. Secondly, yes, we are aware of it. We know that in some older trains there are no screens, for example. So this is why it's important to have the direct information on smartphones for timing with accessible information, of course. There are many experimentations. We are sharing this at UIC in our group, making the bridge between, as I said before, the regulation and the real world, especially. And we can jump on it after, of course.
Of course, let's pick up that conversation again, because that's a really important point. We're out of time. Thank you all so much. Thank you to my excellent panel. Do please join with me.
Very final comment. I heard that the word gaps was said very often today, and I also like to use the word progress, because there has been progress made, even if again progress still has to be made. And this is the purpose of this is the reason why we exchange practices, best practices, so we can all inspire from each other. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of the panel. Please join me in thanking them for their excellent contribution.